getting into the trials. Right, it is definitely worth noting that the majority of people who were living in Chattooga County, Georgia during this time were shocked and sickened by the murders of Charles Scudder and Joey Odom. Even though defense attorneys for the murderers tried to blame the victims by alleging drug use, drunken orgies, and strange occult practices by the victims, the jurors remained unconvinced. Page 99. One of the potential jurors was asked if he thought being on drugs was an excuse for the murder, and he said he thought the excuse was a cop-out. The jury also rejected the idea put forth by one of the defense attorneys that Scudder had a motive to drug the men because he was a homosexual. The jury is to be highly commended for not being drawn into such blatantly homophobic rhetoric. And you gotta remember too, they planned this before they went, so they can't really say they were drugged and that's why they did it, because they had a plan before they got there. Charles Scudder and Joey Odom did receive justice, and for a small conservative southern community some 30 years ago, to find the defendants in the trials guilty as charged sent a strong message to the world. Tony West and Avery Lowrance Brock were convicted of murder in Georgia and in a subsequent trial in Mississippi. Both men signed confessions admitting their crimes in both states and admitted guilt again in interviews with the investigators. But each man accused the other of firing the fatal shots that killed Odom and Scudder. In fact, Brock even tried to implicate one of the eyewitnesses, Joey Wells. Kenneth Avery Brock told investigators a completely different story from that of both eyewitnesses and Tony West, blaming most of the shooting on West. In an interview by Tony Gillen was the chief of police at the time, he admitted going back to the car and getting a rifle, but said that when he came back to the chicken coop, Tony West was already holding the professor at knife point. Tony pecked on the door, this is like his words, that's why it's in italics. Tony pecked on the door with the gun barrel. Joey came to the door and he seen the gun and took off running around the end. Well, the kitchen, through the dining room. And Tony shot 4 or 5 times through the window as the door was coming open. He hit Joey about 2 times in the head and knocked the kerosene lantern off the wall in the process. He continued. Joey fell down and we took the professor around into the dining room. We stepped over Joey, walked into the living room, and Tony had the professor by the hair of the head with the gun stuck in his side. When the dogs ran around the left side of the living room, Tony shot both of them and killed them. And of course, that's not the story Yes. The investigator interrupted with a question. Had he already shot the dogs? Yes, 1 time apiece. Through the window? No, when the door swung open. Before or after he shot Joey? Before. Okay. He shot the dogs twice and then Joey fell and we went on in the living room. He pushed the professor down on the couch, started going through drawers and stuff, and I was walking through the house, drinking wine and looking at Sterling and Brass. The professor got up and started to walk to the dining room, and Tony shot him 2 or 3 times.
Almost there.
Just leave it.
Okay.
He fell down against the cabinet or bookcase rather, and he was still breathing, but Tony didn't notice it, and we went ahead and got a bunch of the stuff and put it in the Jeep. Okay. We come back in and Tony heard the professor breathing, and he shot him 2 more times. We got more stuff, and I heard Joey breathing, or air bubbles coming up, with the blood coming out of his throat, and I shot him in the top of the head with a .22 caliber pistol. Then what happened? I went out, cranked the Jeep up, and cut the lights on so it was facing the house, and they was still standing in there. I went in to see what they was doing, and they was looking for the money in the cookie jars and flower boxes and stuff, but they didn't find no money. So I told them, let's go, and we went out. Later in the interview, Gillen asked how long they had been planning to rob and kill Scudder and Odom. About 3 days before. 3 days? Me, Joey, and Tony planned it. So he's trying to pull in that Joey Wells guy in with all this. You, Joey, and Tony, when you say that, who do you mean? Tony West and Joey Wells. It should be noted that Joey Wells was questioned and released on December 18th by Special Agent C.W. Johnson. Sheriff McConnell and District Attorney Ralph Van Pelt. Joey Wells was never charged with any crime. Joey's sworn statement was much like Teresa Hudgens. He said that he was drinking wine and that Avery and Tony were sniffing Toodaloo. He confirmed that Avery went to get the gun, that he pulled the knife on Scudder, and that when he and Teresa ran, Tony West came after them. He told them he couldn't let them go, and they would all leave together. Joey said he pleaded with Tony not to hurt the professor, but that Tony said, "It's just a way of life." Joey Wells said it was Avery who went down to the house with the gun. He said he heard Avery yell at someone, presumably Joey Odom, to get the dogs and get out here. He then heard about 4 or 5 shots. And that was Teresa's story too. They then took the professor down to the house, and he sat on a chair, and Teresa sat with him. The professor got up, and Tony told him to sit down. The professor was then shot by Tony 4 or 5 times. He said the professor fell to his knees and then up against the bookcase. Joey said they made him and Teresa help them search the house and told them that if they told the police, Avery and Tony would say they were involved too. Avery turned the Jeep around and shined the lights inside the house. He found a pistol and a pair of handcuffs. Joey Wells said the professor moaned at that point, and Avery said, "The son of a bitch is still alive," and shot him with the pistol. Joey Wells further stated that later that week, Teresa called him and told him she was going to the police, so they got together and called the sheriff. The defense attorneys were court appointed, and since both West and Brock had signed confessions and they were eyewitnesses to the crime, these attorneys faced an uphill battle from the start. The first man to be tried was 17-year-old Avery Brock. Brock continued to allege he was not the shooter. He claimed he had only given 1 coup de grace to Joey Odom when he came back in the house to load up the loot and found him still making sounds. He claimed it was Tony West who killed Charles Scudder and fired the other shots at Joey Odom. After damning testimony was given against him at the hearing, he was indicted by a Georgia grand jury on February 9th. After consulting with his lawyers, Brock decided to take the plea. His attorney stated that if the judge had given him the death penalty, they would have taken the plea off the table. However, the judge sentenced Brock to serve 3 consecutive life sentences, and on February 15th, Brock pled guilty to the murders. In a statement given on December 21st, 1982, Avery Brock tried to pin most of the blame on Tony West and tried to implicate Joey Wells by saying he had helped them plan the murders 3 days before the crime. Later, when the judge asked Brock during sentencing what happened, he said, "I killed Odom. Odom was the first one to die. I shot him through the front door in the temple twice. Then when we came back to the house, Scudder got up and started walking toward the dining room, and Tony shot him 5 times in the back of the head. We loaded up the stuff, got in the Jeep and the car, and left. We went from there to Mississippi." "Was it a planned murder?" asked the judge. "Yes, sir," Brock replied. Brock was taken to the Floyd County Jail and later transferred to Alto Correctional Facility in Alto, Georgia. And he is still, I don't think he's at that one. I looked it up yesterday just to see if anything had changed. He's at, I think it's Coffee Correctional Facility. I don't know, he's Tony West he died in prison. He was not executed, but I don't know how he died. He's dead.
Did he kill?
No, he died of
I think
a natural
he
cause.
was just like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think he got killed. Tony West was tried separately, and it soon became apparent to his defense attorneys that there was more evidence against him than Brock. West had already confessed to the murder of Lieutenant Phelps to every law enforcement officer who had questioned him. West was indicted in February, and the jury selection got underway on February 28th. Superior Court Judge Joseph E. Loggins